Here's where it gets a little sensitive, because I've been coached a little bit, but I do want to talk about something pretty serious. We can't ignore what is happening in the country as it relates to companies throughout the country being assaulted in many ways by the threat of unionization.
I mean, it's obvious that like Starbucks hasn't listened through all these years. You know, I mean, it's not a new thing that came up that we wanted more labor, we wanted more pay.
And now we have a group, an organization, trying to take our people.
Pay us what we're worth and give us the labor needed to execute your demands. We are overworked, we are underpaid. There is a big change coming in this company, and, you know, just support us in what we want. The communication between higher ups and our stores started to become non-existent. We noticed that stores that were being built were not as well put together as older stores. They introduced so many new things like components to drinks, mobile orders, deliveries. We were never given the tools to make that happen properly. We were doing all this extra work and we weren't getting paid for what we think that we were worth. The fact that they're cutting hours in stores nationwide, the fact that they are writing people up. They fired 7 people in Tennessee, the Memphis 7. It's a tactic that Starbucks has used before. I feel like they're flexing their muscles this time, but it's not gonna work. They're not gonna win this time. There's so much power behind our movement, or Buffalo's movement, that they're not gonna be able to do what they did before, and it's not gonna work.
Well, on Tuesday, we saw the original Starbucks store in Seattle unanimously vote in favor of union representation. In fact, union votes around the country, plus other factors, like Starbucks' recent guidance, have been hitting the stock. It is down more than 25% year to date.
All right, welcome back. It's Femme Friday, as you guys know, April 15th, Femme Friday, and we have Hannah Faris on. Hannah is a multimedia journalist based out of Chicago, reporting acts across the U.S. I cannot read right now. Reporting across the U.S. She's been featured in these Times, Hyde Park Herald, and has a piece out right now in these Times about the Starbucks workers. Starbucks workers are facing down one of the most intense union busting campaigns in decades. You guys have been following it, I'm sure, starting in my hometown of Buffalo, New York. Hannah, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
So I think folks have been watching as now more than 100 Starbucks stores, as you mentioned, in 27 states, and that's as of March 21st. I'm sure there's more at this point, that they have launched campaigns to unionize. Before we get to like the anti-union effort, a lot of folks have talked about the secret sauce of Starbucks, why Starbucks has been able to just multiply. I mean, Amazon workers are now doing this too, but and so many other workers. But is it just like seeing the success of one store that makes it multiply, or is there something about the conditions of having these small stores with a few workers, younger? Starbucks likes to pretend that they're this progressive company. I don't know. I mean, what is it in your opinion that makes them so special?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a combination of things, right? And as sort of an update, we published the story early March, went online mid-March, and at about that time, I think the article says 120 some odd stores have filed. A month later, less than a month later, over 220 have filed. So it's almost double.
How many stores are there entirely?
I want to say there's over 220, including the stores that have won elections, as well as the 2 that have lost elections.
Like how many stores, Starbucks-wise, in the U.S.? Do we have any sense?
There's about 9,000. So there's still
get moving, guys, moving.
Right, but I mean, if it's doubling month to month.
I'm just kidding.
I can't do that math, but it's spreading, which is nuts. But in terms of what the secret sauce is, in large degree, that's something I think organizers are still trying to figure out. Like for this piece, I talked with organizers at Workers United, which is an affiliate of SEIU, that Starbucks Workers United, that campaign stems from. Talked to organizers there, talked to folks with the AFL-CIO, labor historians, and partly because it's so new, people are still trying to figure out exactly what it is, because we want to know how to replicate that, right? At other stores, at franchises. But part of it obviously comes from the fact that workers are fed up. Minimum wage workers have been struggling for years, especially in light of the pandemic, right? People are putting their lives on the line for, in some places, $7 an hour, right? So, it's the combination of that, the combination of feeling like this place they have given a lot of their lives to, that they have made their career, that they really do love, does not care for them, does not see them as an equal, and is oftentimes forcing them into situations where they have to take care of each other. So a lot of the organizing has come so naturally for workers at these stores, because they've been taking care of each other. They've been stepping up and advocating for themselves for months, if not years, right? So that's a huge part of it, as well as, in conversations with workers that we talked to for this story, so many of them did cite seeing that initial win, right, at Buffalo in December as a sort of motivating force to finally file, right? They had been talking about it, had been whispering about it, after sort of realizing that it even was a possibility, right? But yeah, all eyes were sort of on that first vote count. And then, as soon as that happened, within the months of December and January, I forget the exact number, but it just exploded, right? Both in terms of stores that filed, as well as partners that were reaching out to Starbucks Workers United, which is run, as I said, by Workers United, and partners from the Buffalo stores, and kind of more broadly, partners nationally. So, it comes from seeing that win, and also there being this network that's built up, locally and nationally, where stores that are unionizing in towns like Chicago are getting reached out to by other stores interested in unionizing in Chicago, right? They're sharing resources, they're connecting each other with, the Workers United local affiliates. So all that is to say, I don't quite know how to sum it up into like a nice, 3-step.
No, there's no like, if there was, it would be, everybody would have won at this point. There's also a million other dynamics. Like, are you in a right to work state? Are you in a town that has, more union legacy? I grew up in Buffalo. A lot of union workers lost their jobs because of policies, like labor policies out of the late 70s, all the way up to, of course, NAFTA. So they're folks who came from union families. It wasn't foreign, but also like, you recognize the power of it and the dynamics of when labor is under attack. Same thing with Staten Island. And like you go to a place like, I don't know, Arizona, where it's like right to work. I think there's a lot of factors here that maybe 20, 30 years from now we'll see, just like we see the effects of really bad labor policies from 30, 40 years ago. Yeah. With that being said, holy crap, the union busting that's happening. So in general, there's like a union busting playbook. Is this like the normal playbook, and are they going outside of their normal tactics? And also, like, how does the playbook differ based on if it's a right to work state or if it's a labor state? Like, are there differences at all?
Mm-hmm. So as far as the playbook, it seems to be, quite standard, right? In terms of what they're doing. The big things being, forcing workers to go through an NLRB election, right, is the first step in a union busting playbook, right? Knowing that process.
Wait, why is that? I'm sorry to stop you. Why? But forcing them to go through the NLRB, which seems like it should be okay, as opposed to what?
So as opposed to like voluntarily recognizing the union and bargaining in good faith.
Got it.
Yeah, a lot of kind of folks I talked to, a lot of labor historians pointed to that, primarily because if you look at something like a card check, right? Workers are signing union cards. You'd think if, 80, 90% of workers signed cards, signed the petition saying they wanted to unionize, that should be proof enough to bargain in good faith, right? To recognize that, yes, there is overwhelming support for the union. But forcing workers to then go through an election, which, on its face should be democratic, but, really is just a sort of way to delay a union coming in, right? Like most of the, I say this, every Chicago store, for example, that is most filing in January, still have not gotten an election date yet, right? So
Wow.
it really just, it's nuts.
Is that because NLRB is not like fully funded? Like, are they backed up because there are so many new unions popping up or efforts popping up?
Yeah, it seems like as long, in terms of the actual structure of the NLRB, I don't know how much I can say, but the reporting I've seen seems to say that, yeah, they've been really just not, they've been underfunded for, years and years. And while like the general counsel seems to, really be going hard for workers, they just are so at their limit. So it's a mix of that and a mix of, Starbucks, as it's been reported through these NLRB hearings leading up to an election date, is really doing everything it can to try to delay or sort of dilute the vote, right? One of their big tactics that delayed votes in Mesa and Buffalo, for example, was to try to get the ballots impounded, making an argument before the NLRB that, no, we shouldn't be able to do elections on a store-by-store basis. Every store in a district should vote, right? Like obviously trying to just bring in as many people as they can, stores that haven't organized, trying to, just wash those votes with no votes. And every single attempt they've made to do that, they have lost the case on, but they continue doing it, seemingly because it does just delay the vote. The longer people go without a vote, the more time corporate has to pull employees into one-on-one meetings, to send out letters, detailing the facts about the union, right, et cetera. So, yeah, all that is to say, this isn't to disparage the NLRB, but just the way the process is going, it's not good for workers. And another example being, the Memphis workers, which had a very, very public campaign, especially in which 7 were fired, presumably for, or as it's been reported, for union organizing. They also have not received their election date. 7 workers are still out of a job. They've had to have money raised for them via GoFundMe. And they're not giving up. They're some of the sort of strongest people that I've seen, but no one should have to, walk through a minefield to just get to a union election, let alone get a union. Sorry, I don't know if that answers the question.
No, definitely is. And then how is it escalated after that? Like once they're organizing, in the store, for instance, what are the tactics they're using for union busting?
Yeah, so some of the big tactics beyond just delaying the vote are, one of the first things that I would hear of happen that workers would tell me about is within days or a week of filing for election, releasing that letter, a bunch of managers that they have never seen or maybe rarely seen would just start appearing in the store, right? Regional managers, district managers. One worker I talked to that I think had been working at their Starbucks for 7 years, was seeing managers for the first time, right, who had presumably been with the company for a decade. So these managers would show up. In some cases, they would try to, build a rapport with employees, try to become friends with them, ask, what it is that they could be doing better, trying to put on this sort of friendly face. We're here to help. We're here to enhance the partner experience. In other cases, some would just, per what employees told me, some would just sit in the lobby all day at a table facing the counter, just watching people. And the common thread I heard, we talked to, over a dozen baristas, across the country. The most common thing I heard is that everyone felt like they were being, like they were under surveillance, right? So that is usually the first tactic. What ends up happening shortly after that is these managers start hosting what they call listening sessions, right? To hear employee grievances, try to make the workplace better, and then ultimately, share facts about the union, as they call it. In these cases, it's either been, one-on-one, manager pulls an employee onto the floor, often during the workday, in some cases in the middle of a very busy workday. In some cases, or in this one case, this worker Eugene told me about, management were pulling staff off the floor during some of the busiest times of the day, rush hours, right? Pulling them into these meetings where, while they wouldn't explicitly say this, they would essentially imply, oh, nothing is guaranteed in a union contract. These benefits that you rely on, these wages that you feed your family with, they could be gone, you could lose your health care, you could lose your college tuition, which are things that Starbucks offers, basically implying that to employees, pulling them off the floor at one of the busiest times of the day, just causing them so much distress from those conversations alone, from the intimidation, that they had to take off for the rest of the day or lunch and just cry, because it was just overwhelming. And it's also, it's a workspace. It's interesting in that it's a small cafe, right? So beyond just the surveillance that workers would talk about, where management would watch them at the counter, they have very little private space. They have very little space to actually take a break, talk about what's been going on, and actually organize. So they are just constantly, between just the stress of the job itself and the undue burden distress management is putting on them, they really have no escape and are just having to deal with this day in and day out. So that's one tactic, as well as these things called captive audience meetings, which are similar, but it's, all staff essentially pulled into a meeting with management. And we've heard stories about this. Happened in Chicago, actually, in February, stories where, the store closed for an hour or two. All of the sort of regional management was there. You had managers crying. They talked about, what a big family they were. You don't want to sort of union this big bad third party coming in and, ruining the familial relationship they have. And, this is a store where workers were routinely getting death threats from customers, and management previously had been blowing them off. So yeah, it's just, that alone is just, a lot of stress. And then kind of beyond that, as far as union busting, there's obviously retaliation, right, which is illegal, but happens. And there's no, I don't think I've seen the most recent reporting on this, but one worker that I talked to had been kind of keeping a total of partners nationally that have pretty credible cases to being fired, for unionizing or for, being very active in their store's campaign. And it's over 20, and this obviously includes the Memphis 7. But yeah, it's creating, ultimately a culture of fear among workers, between telling them, hey, you might lose everything if you go forward with this, you'll have to pay dues, you'll lose your autonomy. And, this fear, I might lose my job for this ultimately. That's kind of the gist of what workers are facing. And, there are a lot of little things too, like workers getting texts from the emergency line on Starbucks that are telling them to vote no, if ballots went out, right? Flyers going up in store. Starbucks put out a website that kind of spread a lot of its union facts. The whole gamut of things, there's
And Howard Schultz, of course, also putting his foot in his mouth every 5 seconds, thinking that he's like, that's what's so amazing is like the board of Starbucks thinks, oh, this is the guy who has put his foot in his mouth quite a few times and being completely disconnected. Guy ran for president. He thinks that, the board is like, that's who is going to speak to these workers. And he's messed up multiple times and they still are like, nope, we're gonna keep him.
Yeah, you would think after he invoked the Holocaust in his speech to workers, that would be enough to go, oh, maybe this guy isn't like the best orator, but no, yeah, he's there. But yeah, I did kind of hear from workers that they were getting a kick out of now being able to address their like letters, when they filed to Howard Schultz directly.
Amazing.
Yeah. So that was.
Well, I mean, and just before we wrap, there is this aspect of it that's so fascinating, which is like people don't have an option. Like, oh, if you unionize, you're going to pay dues, and like we might fire you. And I think what's happening, correct me if I'm wrong, like having talked to Starbucks workers and organizers, they don't care. They're like, we want to do this because it's not enough, and we're not surviving. And so the alternative is we still aren't surviving. And I just find it really amazing. And maybe there's something about like the younger members of the Starbucks workforce who just don't know an alternate universe where like there's vibrant. I don't know. I mean, it's maybe that's the leadership not understanding like just how bad it is on the ground. The conditions are for folks that they're willing to take these risks to have a successful union.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly seems to be a disconnect because with workers that I've talked to, in most cases, and there are, some cases where the union busting has kind of thwarted efforts. I think most recently there was an election yesterday in Virginia where the union lost and, is very much attributing it to the massive union busting campaign. But for the most part, all of the threats, all of the harassment workers are saying is only adding fuel to the fire, right? It's how can a company, try to use this rhetoric of, oh, we're your family, but we're also threatening to, ruin your life, right?
Right.
So yeah, it's, with Memphis, for example, I think we talk about this in the article, but 7 people were fired, and yet you had remaining workers in the store come out and join the picket every single day, come back harder with wanting to organize, right? And to my understanding, that is still going. That spirit is still going. And it's fortunate that it also comes at a time, in the last few years where public support for unions has really grown, right? Especially in the last year,
right?
And especially among young people, which is something I never expected would happen. I always hoped would. But it's just really exciting to see. And as workers and organizers told me, the thing that, people believe will, keep the fire kind of going within workers and put pressure on Starbucks to stop union busting is public support and public attention, doing as much as you can in your town, community, wherever Starbucks is unionizing to support those workers.
So go, if you do live in a town where there's Starbucks and you do go to Starbucks, just show your support. Send them a little note, like at the cash cash register. When they ask you for your name, be like supporting a union or whatever,
Union strong. Give them a big tip. They really like to.
Exactly. All right. Well, I'm very grateful to you. Thank you for writing about this and keeping us, informed. 200 plus union efforts around the country, only 8,750 to go. We can do it, but it's exponential. I mean, like you said, it's doubling every month. So this is at this rate, and there's a point where they just can't bust that many at once. So Workers United. You know the line. Hannah Faris, thank you so much. Go check out. It's from March, but it's still relevant. Super interesting. We'll just keep covering this because we've been doing it since the beginning. So thank you very much, Hannah. We are really grateful to have a great community on Patreon who loves and appreciates the work that we're doing, the guests that we have on the show, and we love them right back. If you are not already a patron, please join us on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. You can also get some swag, some merch on there as well. We're also doing a big Q&A right now. Patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. And if you're not already, please subscribe. Every single podcast platform out there we are on now.